We've looked closely at conservative thought and tied it to a cautious orientation towards the other. But when it comes to the other, there's two sides of that coin, a right and a left side. An outsider showing up in your society may be a threat, but not always. The stranger may be friendly. The foreign group might make a good ally. This is where left-leaning characters come in. Liberals try to push past the natural discomfort that comes with interacting with a strange person or group. They preach tolerance of the other, ethnic minorities, people with unconventional lifestyles, immigrants. They may even see convicted criminals as worth saving. And when groups have a disagreement, war, as we all know, is not always the answer. Liberals aren't necessarily pacifists, but compared to conservatives, they tend to be slower to war and quicker to peace. They put a check on humanity's more aggressive tendencies and keep society from attacking every problem with the sword. People on the left are less comfortable with the negative outcomes of competition. They're also less worried that people who need help are lazy or undeserving. These attitudes are connected to liberals' lower social dominance orientation and tendency to trust the other. Liberals and conservatives approach problems differently. For conservatives, problems are caused by bad people who need to be stopped and punished. For liberals, the solution to problems is not to seek and destroy enemies. It's to make sure everyone has what they need, so there's no reason to fight. In other words, the left gets rid of the other by including it, making it part of the whole. As is the case with the right, the liberal relationship with government is complicated. In contrast to conservatives, liberals promote government entitlement programs because they see a big bureaucracy as the best way in a large, complex society to make sure all people are taken care of, including the other. This belief in being your brother's keeper also explains liberal comfort with progressive taxation to pay for entitlements. Rich people pay a higher tax rate, and that wealth is redistributed, spent on the have-nots. Conservatives demand group conformity to deal with threats. Liberals demand that group members take care of each other. Conservatives may agree this is a good idea, it's just that liberals define the group more broadly. Businesses profit more when the government leaves them alone, so the right prefers less regulation. The thing is, a hands-off economic policy can result in certain problems. Those high profits may be a result of overcharging consumers, underpaying workers, using up natural resources, and other iffy practices. But for conservatives, it's a dog-eat-dog world. Competition is not for the timid. Liberals, on the other hand, prefer not to let the dogs eat each other. For the left, the role of government is to protect the little guy, the consumer, the worker, the public, to make sure competition is fair and that no one gets too powerful. Laws regarding worker safety, consumer or environmental protection, and minimum wage are examples of the kind of government regulations liberals promote. Despite their approval of economic regulation and redistribution of wealth, in some ways liberals favor a hands-off government. When it comes to most kinds of personal behavior, like religion, sex, or speech, the left wants the state to back off. In more authoritarian societies, the government may require conformity and punish those who fail to conform. Liberals are defenders of the unconventional and see this kind of control as highly problematic. Now that we've looked at the left and right, we should see that when it comes to who loves or hates government, it's clear that the answer very much depends on what the government does with its power, not whether the party running it is liberal or conservative. We've talked about the far right and noted that as we go there, we see extremes of inequality and aggression towards the other. So what happens under the far left? The question itself is problematic because it depends on what we mean by far left. In the real world, the word communism is associated with nations that have state-planned economies, no democracy, and little or no civil rights. The former Soviet Union and current North Korea are the best examples. In these countries, government regulation of the economy is indeed extreme. The government owns the farms and factories. Everyone works for the government. This kind of economy doesn't grow well or produce much, but the real problem is that in these so-called leftist nations, there is still great inequality. Government elites live well, and most other people live in poverty. What does this have to do with liberalism, equality, a low social dominance orientation? Nothing. And when it comes to tolerance of the other in these totalitarian communist societies, they're no different from the far right. People are not free. They have no civil rights, and human rights violations by the state are common. History has shown that authoritarian governments, dictatorships, totalitarianism can be associated with leaders that call themselves right-wing or left-wing. The right gets Hitler, but the left gets Stalin or Kim Jong-un. Though attempts have been made, there are no nation-states today that could genuinely be called far left. There are some hippie communes and things like that, but these are small scale. When it comes to national governments, the farthest left we're going to find is probably Scandinavian countries like Denmark or Sweden. These countries are commonly called socialist, but they're very different than North Korea or the USSR. For starters, they're democratic with civil rights, but more importantly, their basic economic system is still capitalist. All developed nations have mainly capitalist economies, but also some socialist policies. Even the U.S. has Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, etc. It's not a question of, is the society socialist? It's a matter of degree. When it comes to first world countries, the U.S. is probably the least socialist. Going left from there, like to Western Europe or even Australia, we see more socialist policies. Free health care or college, for example. Keep going left and you eventually get to Scandinavia, where we find countries with the lowest rates of economic inequality in the world. But looking at the situation realistically, these socialist societies are better described as very liberal. They tax the rich more and have generous entitlements, but their economies still produce wealth for some and poverty for others. The most extreme yet genuine leftness would be a society set up for total economic equality. Everybody has the same wealth and income, and great personal freedom in the sense of civil rights. You can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt someone else, and yes, that could include owning an assault rifle. Is this even possible? Whether or not it is, there are people on the far left who prefer this maximization of personal freedom and economic equality. How exactly it would work is another story, but the political idea rejects the notion that it's natural for some people to lose in economic competition and go without. So, for these radical leftists, capitalism itself is a problem. Under capitalism, people compete. Some lose and suffer. When you're as far to the left as you can go, your social dominance orientation is minimized, and for you, there effectively is no other. So you feel bad about anyone being excluded or suffering. It's just like you don't make your kids compete for dinner or throw one of them out for being gay. Or maybe you do. I guess some people do that. Everyone cooperates, everyone wins. This was the original pure idea of communism or socialism. It's just never been successfully implemented in the real world. Society is vulnerable to destruction by internal and external enemies. We have conservatives because we need warriors to face these kinds of threats. But we also need people with a different sort of courage to offer. The courage to trust, the courage to change. We have liberals because society is vulnerable in another way. The world changes, and this occasionally requires society to adjust its standard ways of doing things. The solution to some challenges may be to reach out to the other, to join with them and try strange new ways to solve problems. As it turns out, outsiders, as well as unconventional others within your society, might have some good ideas. Ideas that could lead to a better life for everyone. In other words, progress. Conformity, patriotism, group loyalty, all useful things when our group is under attack. But there is such a thing as too much of them. Excessive conformity threatens human rights and democracy. Demanding complete conformity to tradition stifles creativity. Liberals provide the balance here. They defend people who break from the norm, different backgrounds, different opinions. This is why liberals promote diversity and inclusiveness, and they balance conservatives' tendency to doubt the motives of people asking for help. Are liberals naive and gullible, bleeding hearts? Compared to conservatives, yes. But we need the trusting, compassionate left and the cautious right. People do need help and acceptance. But people can also take advantage of generosity and trust.